A cruel boss fires a 7-month pregnant employee, citing cuts. What he doesn't know is that she is a childhood friend of Beyoncé. When the star storms into his office and uncovers the injustice, she confronts him with unstoppable fury. Will the tyrant fall? Will there be redemption? Pure outrage. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. Valeria walked with a firm step through the halls of Innovatech, but inside her heart was pounding. She had seen the result twice, but she still couldn't believe it. She paused for a second in front of the break room door, took a deep breath, and entered. Her co-workers were chatting animatedly until they noticed her expression. "I have something to tell you all," she announced with a nervous smile. Anticipation filled the room. When she finally said it, the applause and congratulations were immediate. Clara hugged her effusively, while Andres gave her a high five. "Congratulations, Valeria. You're going to be a great mom." But the euphoria of the moment didn't dispel her concern. Lucas Mendez, the department head, wasn't exactly a compassionate leader. Obsessed with efficiency, any distraction annoyed him. And a pregnancy wasn't just a distraction. In his mind, it was a threat to productivity. Valeria tried to push that thought away. She wouldn't let fear steal this moment from her. An hour later, she was in Dr. Echeverria's office, tapping her fingers on her phone. She had barely managed to focus on her work that morning. When the doctor entered with her file, he smiled kindly. "Congratulations, Valeria. The test confirms the pregnancy. How are you feeling?" "Good, I think." "A little nervous," she admitted. The doctor nodded. "That's normal. But there's something you need to seriously consider. Excessive stress can be dangerous for the baby's development. You have to prioritize your well-being." Valeria nodded, but her mind kept returning to Lucas. Avoiding workplace conflicts would be complicated if he decided to turn her pregnancy into a problem. That night, Valeria met Diego at a discreet cafe, far from the eyes of the office. Their relationship was a secret by mutual agreement. They didn't want to deal with unnecessary rumors at work. "Are you sure?" asked Diego, taking her hands. She nodded. The doctor confirmed it today. Diego smiled and hugged her tightly. "I'll be with you every step of the way, I promise." Valeria felt a momentary relief, but the shadow of Lucas still loomed over her. They would keep their relationship a secret, but that wouldn't change the fact that her boss would see her pregnancy as a problem. And she knew that he didn't deal with problems. He eliminated them. Lucas called her to his office at the end of the day. It hadn't sounded like a simple meeting. It had sounded like a sentence. When she entered, he was standing by the window, hands in his pockets. He didn't look at her immediately. "Close the door, please," he said in a neutral voice. Valeria obeyed. The air in the room grew heavier. "I'm going to be direct," Lucas continued, turning to face her. "We're making staff cuts. Unfortunately, your position has been affected." Valeria felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. "Cuts?" she repeated, incredulous. "Lucas, It's nothing personal," he interrupted coldly. "The company needs to make tough decisions." She knew it was a lie. Her performance had been impeccable. Her pregnancy had everything to do with this. But arguing would only make things worse. Her hand instinctively went to her abdomen. She thought of the doctor's words. Stress could affect the baby. She took a deep breath. It wasn't worth the fight. "I understand," she murmured, though she didn't. Packing up her things was worse than she had imagined. Every item on her desk had a story. Every folder, every pen, every sticky note with reminders of ongoing projects. Now, it was all part of the past. One by one, her colleagues approached. Clara was the first. "This is an injustice," she whispered, hugging her tightly. "They can't do this to you," Andres added. "We're going to do something, Valeria." Valeria's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. She didn't want to break. Not there. Don't get into trouble for me, she said, forcing a smile. Just thank you. But the indignation on their faces was evident. This wouldn't end here. Minutes later, Lucas gathered the entire team. His expression was stern, but his tone pretended to be conciliatory. I know there are rumors going around, he said, arms crossed. I want to make it clear that the decision about Valeria was strictly financial. The company is going through a difficult time, and these adjustments are necessary. Silence. Then, someone in the back murmured, Liar. Lucas scanned the room. No one dared to speak again, but the atmosphere was thick with distrust. Valeria wasn't there to hear it, but she didn't need to. She knew what was coming. This was only the beginning. The halls of Innovatech buzzed with murmurs. Valeria's dismissal had not only left a void in the office, but had also planted a growing unease that spread like an infection. Some employees spoke in hushed tones near the coffee machine. Others exchanged furtive glances as they passed by Lucas's office. No one dared to confront him, but everyone knew the truth. This wasn't just a simple staff cut. Diego observed the tense atmosphere from his desk. He clenched his teeth and pulled out his phone. He knew he couldn't just sit back and do nothing. During his lunch break, he met Valeria at a nearby cafe. She was waiting for him with a tense expression, but no trace of tears. We could reach out to someone with influence, Diego suggested in a low voice. Valeria shook her head immediately. No, I don't want favors. And definitely not like this. Diego leaned forward. But it's not fair, Val. You know this wasn't a financial decision. She looked away. She knew Diego was right, but she couldn't turn to Beyoncé. Not yet. I'll handle it my way, she said firmly. Diego exhaled in frustration, but didn't push further. However, a plan was already forming in his mind. That same night, Diego gathered a small group of co-workers at his apartment. Among them were Sofia, the data analyst, Javier from the development team, and Camila from human resources. No one trusted the others enough to discuss this at the office. Lucas can't get away with this, Diego said, crossing his arms. We need proof. But proof of what? Asked Camila, uneasy. Of how he really runs the company, Javier replied. We all know he's done questionable things, but no one's dared to document it. Sophia pulled out her laptop. I could review the files from recent dismissals and look for suspicious patterns. Maybe there are more cases like Valeria's. And I could check internal emails, added Camila. Sometimes Lucas isn't as careful as he thinks. Diego nodded. Good. But we need something more solid. Something that exposes him without a doubt. It was then that Javier, the quietest of the group, looked up. I can get it. The next day, Javier entered the office with a small device hidden in his watch. He couldn't risk being seen with a phone in hand. Lucas held private meetings daily, and if he said anything incriminating, Javier would make sure it was recorded. Hours later, in the meeting room, the opportunity came. Lucas was speaking with one of the managers, the door slightly ajar. Valeria's situation was a minor issue. Lucas said dismissively, We can't afford to keep someone unproductive just because they're pregnant. Here, we need committed people, not dead weight. Javier felt a chill. He discreetly pressed his watch and let the recording continue. And don't even think about suggesting it was an unfair dismissal. Lucas continued. If anyone asks, it's due to staff cuts. Period. Javier left before he could be noticed. At his desk, he reviewed the recording. His heart raced. This was more than enough. That night, the video was sent to the secret group. When Diego played it on his phone, he knew they had exactly what they needed. Beyoncé was in her dressing room minutes before going on stage. The crowd roared outside, eager to see her. But her mind was elsewhere. On her phone screen, an old photo of Valeria and her smiling under the sun of their childhood. Too much time had passed. She decided it was time to do something for her friend. She took out her phone and called her lawyer. "I want to make an anonymous donation to Innovatech. A considerable amount. Have it allocated to diversity and inclusion programs. Make sure everything is in order fiscally. And one more thing. I want to deliver the check in person." The lawyer took notes efficiently. "We can handle it. When do you plan to do it?" Beyoncé smiled. Surprise. Beyoncé's legal team worked quickly. They drafted the documents, consulted with philanthropy experts, and ensured that the donation was protected against any scrutiny. Beyoncé was clear that she didn't want her gesture to turn into a media scandal. This was personal. One of her advisors looked up from his laptop. "We can keep it anonymous, but a donation of this magnitude will attract attention at Innovatech. If we deliver it in person, it will be hard to keep it secret." Beyoncé crossed her arms. Then let's not keep it secret. She had made a decision. She would go to Innovatech and see for herself how things were. The next morning, Innovatech's office descended into chaos. An email from Beyoncé's team had arrived directly in Lucas Mendes' inbox. Brief but impactful. "Beyoncé will visit your facilities to make a donation. Stay available." Lucas read the message 3 times. A golden opportunity. The publicity he had always dreamed of. He immediately called his assistant. "I want everything to be perfect. Get photographers. Inform the employees. I want it to look like a top-tier corporate event." The employees exchanged puzzled glances. Beyoncé at Innovatech. No one understood why the star would be interested in the company. But Lucas didn't question his luck. To him, this was a stroke of fortune he had to take full advantage of. What he didn't know was that this visit would change his fate forever. Beyoncé stepped out of the limousine with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. The cameras began flashing as soon as her foot touched the ground. Innovatech had prepared a grand entrance, with employees lined up on either side, smiling and applauding. But she wasn't there for a simple ceremony. As she walked down the hallway, she noticed the whispers. Fragments of phrases floated in the air. "Unfair dismissal. Valeria didn't deserve that. Lucas fired her for being pregnant." Beyoncé frowned and slowed her pace. "What did they say?" she asked quietly, turning to her assistant. But there was no time for a response. An employee, a young man with thick glasses and a nervous demeanor, pushed his way through the crowd. "Ms. Knowles," he said in a trembling voice, "I need to speak with you. It's about Valeria." Before he could say anything else, 2 bodyguards intercepted him and gently pushed him back. Beyoncé raised her hand, stopping them. "Let him speak." The employee swallowed hard. He glanced around quickly, afraid someone might be watching him. Lucas fired Valeria for being pregnant. He said it was due to cuts, but it wasn't. We all know it. Beyoncé felt something burning in her chest. She looked around. The employees' faces reflected anxiety, but also hope. They knew she could do something about it. "Where is Lucas?" she asked sharply. Lucas's assistant, who had remained in the background until now, stepped forward. "In his office, ma'am." Beyoncé didn't wait for directions. She turned on her heels and strode down the hallway, with the press close behind. Lucas was waiting at the door of his office, wearing a practiced smile. "Ms. Knowles, it's an honor to have you here. If you'll allow me, I want to see this company's diversity and inclusion policies," Beyoncé said bluntly. Lucas blinked, caught off guard by the sudden demand. "Of course. Although I don't have the document on hand right now." "Find it." Lucas swallowed. His eyes darted quickly from side to side, as if searching for an escape. His nervousness spoke for him. The room fell into a heavy silence. Every second that passed without a response only reinforced Beyoncé's suspicions. There are no inclusion policies here, are there? Lucas opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The cameras captured every detail. His tense expression, the sweat on his forehead, his lack of words. Beyoncé crossed her arms. Then, we have a problem. Lucas Mendez looked up from his desk when his office door swung open. No one had knocked. No one had announced an entry. Beyoncé walked in as if the office belonged to her, with firm steps and an impenetrable gaze. Beyoncé, Lucas stammered, standing up hastily. To what do I owe the honor? She ignored him. She took another step forward, leaned on the desk, and looked him straight in the eyes. Do you know who Valeria is, Lucas? She asked coldly. Lucas tried to compose a smile. Of course, a former employee. Very talented. But unfortunately, don't play with me. Beyoncé interrupted him. Valeria is my lifelong friend. And you fired her for being pregnant. Lucas blinked. He searched for words he couldn't find. That's not exactly how it. Shut up, she ordered. Her voice cut through the air like a knife. You are going to reinstate her. And you are going to make changes in this company. Immediate changes. Lucas swallowed hard. He forced himself to regain his composure. Valeria wasn't fired for that. Her performance left much to be desired. Beyoncé took out her phone and swiped across the screen. She turned it toward Lucas. Messages from employees, full of support for Valeria, filled the screen. Poor performance. Beyoncé let out a short, sharp laugh. Your own employees say otherwise. Lucas felt a knot in his stomach. He sat back down, trying to buy time. Business decisions can't always be understood from the outside. I want to see the termination contract. Beyoncé interrupted him. Lucas tensed. She waited. The silence stretched. Lucas. The director of Innovatech slowly stood up, walked around his desk, and went to a filing cabinet. His hands trembled as he pulled out a folder. He placed it on the table and opened it. The papers inside said nothing. There was no valid justification. Beyoncé crossed her arms. There are no legitimate reasons, are there? It was a personal decision. Lucas didn't respond. He couldn't. His skin turned pale. This is what's going to happen, Beyoncé continued. You are going to reinstate Valeria. You are going to reform these policies once and for all. And you are going to do it now. Lucas collapsed into his chair. He ran a hand over his face and nodded, defeated. He knew he had lost. Lucas felt cold sweat running down his back. Outside, the cameras were still rolling. The journalists were waiting for a statement. His employees watched from the hallways, some with satisfaction, others with fear. He was trapped. There was no way out. He took a deep breath and forced a smile before speaking. After reviewing the situation, I have decided to reinstate Valeria to her position. Innovatech is committed to strengthening its inclusion policies and ensuring a fair work environment for everyone. The employees' murmurs were immediate. Some applauded. Others stayed silent, processing the news. Beyoncé didn't take her eyes off Lucas, her expression impassive. He knew he hadn't gained anything with that announcement. He had only avoided his downfall for now. But as his lips uttered those words, his mind was scheming something else. He wasn't going to let it end like this. Beyoncé and Valeria had exposed him, humiliated him. This wasn't going to stand. He wouldn't let two women destroy everything he had built. The Innovatech boardroom was silent when Lucas entered. The board members watched him with tense faces. They had seen the news. They had heard the scandal. What the hell was that, Lucas? One of the executives snapped, slamming the table with his palm. Crisis management, Lucas replied, maintaining his composure. I resolved it before it got worse. Resolved it? The company's name is on everyone's lips, and not for good reasons. Another shot back. We want a detailed report on how you plan to minimize the damage. We can't afford to lose investors. Lucas nodded. He needed to stay calm. I'll regain the public's trust. We'll implement new inclusion policies, but with strategic measures. I'll make this story disappear in a few days. The narrative will be in our favor. The board didn't seem convinced, but they didn't have better options. You have 1 week to show results, Lucas. 1 week. Or we'll find someone else to handle this. The message was clear. Lucas wasn't just losing control of the company. He was losing his place in it. He dialed Valeria's number for the 3rd time. The call went straight to voicemail. He took a deep breath and tried again. Nothing. Answer, damn it, he muttered under his breath. He knew the only way to minimize the damage was to bring her back. If Valeria returned, the scandal would lose momentum. He could control the narrative. He could turn the story around before it destroyed him completely. But Valeria wasn't answering. Frustrated, he threw the phone on the desk and rubbed his face with both hands. He had to do something. He couldn't let Beyoncé and Valeria win. He couldn't lose everything. If Valeria wouldn't answer his calls, he'd find another way to make her give in. He wasn't going to give up so easily. Connor placed his hands on his desk and scanned the disorganized notes in front of him. Beyoncé's intervention at Innovatech had become a viral phenomenon. It wasn't just a corporate scandal. It was a direct attack on workplace discrimination, led by one of the most influential figures in the world. And he, Connor, had the opportunity to take it even further. He began digging into Lucas Mendez's past. What he found made him frown. There were unofficial reports of workplace harassment, suspicious promotions, and unjustified dismissals. Several former employees had left anonymous comments on business forums, describing a toxic environment at Innovatech under his leadership. It was a pattern, a history, and if he dug deeper, he would probably find solid evidence. Connor picked up the phone and dialed the number. I need an exclusive interview with Beyoncé. As soon as possible. The response came quickly. Beyoncé agreed, but she had one condition. The interview had to focus on labor justice, not personal drama. Connor smiled. He knew that, even though the star wanted to avoid sensationalism, her mere involvement would bring massive attention to the issue, and that would make it impossible for Lucas Mendez to hide. Meanwhile, Innovatech employees started receiving calls from other media outlets. Journalists from all over the country wanted to know more about Lucas. Some employees hesitated to speak, fearing retaliation, but others, outraged by years of abuse and favoritism, began to share their stories. Lucas, for his part, felt the immediate impact. His inbox filled with crisis messages. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. And worst of all, Innovatech's board of directors was demanding explanations. Connor hadn't just launched an investigation. He had started a fire, and Lucas was trapped in it. Connor knew he had something big in his hands, but when he published his article, the impact was more devastating than he had imagined. Within hours, Lucas Mendez's name was trending on all social media platforms. The article detailed years of abuse, favoritism, and, worst of all, testimonies from employees describing situations of sexual harassment. Innovatech, a company that until then had enjoyed an impeccable reputation, began to falter. The investors didn't take long to react. An emergency meeting was called at the headquarters. Some board members demanded immediate answers. They wanted to know if Lucas had anything to say in his defense, or if they were facing a problem impossible to contain. But Lucas wasn't at the meeting. He had disappeared from the office as soon as the article went public. From his apartment, Lucas scrolled through the news with a furrowed brow and his knuckles white from gripping his phone. He needed a strategy. He couldn't let a sensationalist journalist destroy everything he had built. With a quick motion, he dialed his legal team's number. "Find something on Connor," he ordered. "Anything we can use to discredit him." But the evidence against him was too solid. The article wasn't just a collection of rumors. It was backed by testimonies, leaked emails, and internal Innovatech documents. Connor had done his job well. The worst came 2 days later, when a second article was published. This time, Connor not only reaffirmed the accusations against Lucas, but also presented testimonies from former employees who had remained silent until now. Some of the stories were heartbreaking. Women who had been forced to resign after rejecting advances, promotions handed out in exchange for favors, and arbitrary dismissals disguised as restructuring. Lucas's phone wouldn't stop ringing, but the calls weren't from allies. They were from journalists, lawyers, and, worse yet, investors who wanted to distance themselves from him as soon as possible. When he finally answered his lawyer's call, he expected to hear a solution. "I want to sue Connor for defamation," Lucas snapped, his jaw tight. On the other end of the line, his lawyer exhaled resignedly. "Lucas, you don't have a case. The evidence against you is real. If we try to sue him, we'll only draw more attention to the issue. And trust me, you don't want that." Lucas hung up without responding. His hands were shaking. He knew he was cornered, but he still wasn't ready to go down without a fight. He stood up from his chair, his mind racing. He needed to find a way out, and he would find it no matter the cost. The email arrived in the inboxes of Innovatech executives at exactly 7 a.m. Subject: Board of Directors decision. The message was concise and devastating for Lucas Mendez. His contract with the company was terminated immediately. The pressure from investors, combined with Beyoncé's intervention and the media impact of the scandal, had made his continued presence impossible. Lucas read the notification with a clenched jaw, feeling his world collapse in a matter of seconds. Outside Innovatech's headquarters, a swarm of reporters awaited his exit. Flashes, sharp questions. "Will you plead guilty, Mr. Mendez? How do you respond to the harassment accusations?" Lucas covered his face with one hand and walked quickly, ignoring the chaos around him. He wasn't going to give the press the satisfaction of seeing him break down. But he knew this was only the beginning. Lawsuits against him were already underway, and with each new testimony, his situation became more desperate. Meanwhile, in Innovatech's offices, the board of directors had made another crucial decision: to hire an external firm to investigate the company's labor practices. Employees, fed up with the abuse and toxic culture instilled by Lucas, did not hesitate to cooperate. Some sent emails detailing favoritism, unjustified dismissals, and blackmail. Others, braver, showed up in person before the auditors, handing over evidence that Lucas had tried to conceal for years. The preliminary report confirmed what everyone suspected. Lucas Mendez had run the company with a combination of corruption and abuse of power. The investigation's findings would be presented to the board in a week, but the executives already knew that the internal cleanup would be extensive. That same afternoon, Valeria received an unexpected call. "Miss Ramirez, the board of directors would like to discuss the possibility of you returning to Innovatech," said a formal voice on the other end of the line. Valeria did not respond immediately. She had been waiting for this moment, but she also knew she couldn't accept without conditions. "If they want me back, I need guarantees," she said firmly. "Real changes in internal policies, a new code of conduct, effective reporting mechanisms, and I want it in writing." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then a brief response. "Understood. We'll do what's necessary. Can we meet tomorrow to discuss the details?" Valeria hung up the phone. She looked around, feeling the weight of the decision. She knew that returning to Innovatech wouldn't be easy, but this time, she would have the power to change things. And she wasn't going to waste it. Lucas woke up on a thin mattress on the cold floor. The dampness on the walls and the musty smell of the tiny apartment were constant reminders of his downfall. His phone vibrated. Another rejection email. He clenched his eyes shut. Ever since his name had appeared in the headlines, no company wanted anything to do with him. He tried reaching out to old associates, industry contacts, but the responses were always the same: silence or evasiveness. His reputation preceded him. In his prime, he could make a call and land any position. Now, he couldn't even get a serious interview. Entire days passed without him leaving the apartment. The fridge was almost empty, but his desire to eat was non-existent. That night, he decided to go out. He ended up in a dimly lit bar, with a half-full glass of whiskey in front of him. He stared at his reflection in the polished wood of the bar when a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "Lucas Mendez. I can't believe it's you." He looked up. It was Daniel Munoz, a former colleague from Innovatech. Daniel watched him cautiously before sitting down beside him. "I've read everything that's happened. I'm not going to justify what you did, but I'm not going to kick you while you're down either." Daniel paused. "What are you going to do now?" Lucas let out a bitter laugh. "Nothing. There's nothing to do. I'm finished." Daniel shook his head. "That's only true if you decide it is." Lucas leaned on the bar. His hands were shaking. "You have no idea what it's like to lose everything." Daniel sighed. "Of course I do. And I also know that staying on the ground doesn't help at all." Lucas didn't respond. He just took another sip. The conversation ended in a long silence. When Daniel got up to leave, he left his card on the bar. "When you're ready to try, call me. Maybe there's something you can do." Lucas looked at the card for a moment before pushing it aside. The idea of trying again felt as exhausting as it did impossible. His world had shrunk to that glass of whiskey and an apartment where the echo of his own failure haunted him. But as he watched Daniel walk away, a small part of him wondered if everything really was lost. Lucas sat at the small table in his apartment, staring at his phone. Days had passed without a single job call, and now Valeria was offering him something he never imagined: a second chance. "You want me to work for Innovatech again?" he asked, unable to hide his disbelief. "Not exactly," said Valeria. Her voice was firm but not hostile. "We need someone with experience to lead a social responsibility program for single mothers. I can't think of a better way for you to prove that you've changed." Lucas felt a knot in his stomach. He knew that accepting meant facing the same people who despise him. But he also knew he didn't have many options. "I accept," he finally said. "When do I start?" Valeria gave a slight smile. "Tomorrow. But there are conditions." Lucas nodded. He knew there would be. Valeria adjusted her jacket as she waited in the private lounge of a luxury hotel. Beyoncé arrived on time, with her usual confidence. There were no formal greetings. "Are you sure about this?" Beyoncé asked bluntly. "I am," Valeria replied. "But I want your opinion." Beyoncé watched her for a moment before crossing her arms. Lucas was a monster to many people. "I don't know if someone like that can truly change. But if you believe he deserves a chance, he'll have it under strict supervision." Valeria nodded. She had expected that. He will have to undergo regular evaluations, work under a contract that obligates him to meet ethical standards, and if he fails even once, he's out. Beyoncé exhaled in resignation. "Fine. But if this becomes a problem, I'll handle it myself." Valeria had no doubt that she would. Lucas signed the contract with steady hands. He knew he was walking on thin ice, but this was his only chance to rebuild his life. "If you break even one of these rules, you're out," said Valeria, handing him a copy of the document. Lucas read the clauses carefully. Weekly reports. Quarterly evaluations. No privileges, no margin for error. He accepted it. "I understand," he replied. Valeria looked at him intently. "I don't expect this to be easy for you. But if you've truly changed, this is your chance to prove it." Lucas held her gaze. "I won't waste it." Lucas entered the meeting room with a stiff neck and sweaty hands. He knew all eyes were on him. At first, his new colleagues in the social responsibility program barely spoke to him. The wary glances and whispers behind his back were constant. But he didn't complain. He knew he deserved it. Every day, he arrived earlier than the others and left later. He took on tasks no one else wanted to do, reviewing files, organizing meetings, taking notes. He didn't complain. He just listened, observed, learned. Then, little by little, he began making suggestions. Small ones at first. Adjustments to schedules so pregnant employees could attend medical appointments without losing pay. Improvements in space distribution so they could rest without fear of reprisals. At first, they ignored him. But when his proposals began to streamline work and improve the environment, some people started to acknowledge him. A good job here, a nod there. Nothing grand, but enough to let him know he was making progress. At night, Lucas attended therapy, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to understand himself. His anger issues, his obsession with control. The psychologist asked him uncomfortable questions. Why had he reacted so harshly against Valeria? Why was his career more important than others' well-being? Lucas didn't have immediate answers, but he was willing to find them. As the weeks passed, his attitude changed. It was noticeable in his posture, in the way he listened before speaking. Some employees stopped avoiding him. Others still looked at him with distrust, but the hostility had lessened. Valeria watched him from afar, without intervening, without pressuring him. She just gave him space to prove that his change was real. One afternoon, during a meeting, Lucas presented a project he had been preparing for weeks. It was a concrete proposal to improve working conditions for pregnant employees, proper rest areas, flexible schedules, and a protocol to protect against unjustified dismissals. He had studied every point, analyzed costs and benefits. The room fell silent when he finished speaking. The first to speak were the skeptics. How could they trust him? How could they believe he truly cared? But when Valeria spoke up and backed the initiative, the atmosphere shifted. In the end, the proposal was approved. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. That night, Lucas walked through the city with a strange feeling in his chest. It wasn't triumph or satisfaction. It was something deeper, something he hadn't felt in a long time, something akin to redemption. The hall was full. Valeria watched with satisfaction the result of months of effort. The dim lighting and elegant decor gave the charity event an air of exclusivity. High-profile guests, business leaders, and social activists exchanged greetings while the media eagerly awaited Beyoncé's arrival. Lucas moved cautiously through the crowd. He noticed the looks from some attendees, most of them filled with skepticism. He knew that many still saw him as the villain of this story. He kept his composure, remembering Valeria's words. It's not about being forgiven today, but about proving who you are now. The general murmur turned into a roar when Beyoncé entered the hall. Dressed in white and radiating imposing confidence, she greeted those present before taking the microphone on stage. Silence fell instantly. Tonight, we are not only celebrating the creation of a foundation that will change lives, she began, but we are also taking a step toward a world where no pregnant woman has to choose between her job and her future. Her words carried weight. Beyoncé paused, scanning the audience. Then, with a smile, she added, "That's why I want to announce that a portion of the proceeds for my next tour will be donated to this cause." Applause erupted immediately. The ovation shook the hall as camera flashes captured the moment. Valeria, standing at the side of the stage, felt a lump in her throat. All of this, what had seemed impossible months ago, was becoming reality. Lucas clapped along with the others, but he knew his turn was approaching. His speech had been reviewed multiple times, yet no version seemed good enough. When Valeria signaled him from the main table, he knew he could delay no longer. He stepped onto the stage under a tension that was almost palpable. Adjusting the microphone, he looked at the audience. "I don't expect sympathy," he said firmly. "I don't expect anyone to believe me without proof. The only thing I can do is accept who I was and prove through actions that I am no longer that person." Some expressions hardened, while others showed curiosity. Lucas continued, "For years I made the wrong choices. I hurt people who trusted me. I convinced myself that success justified any method. But I was wrong. And I'm here because someone gave me the chance to make amends." A brief silence filled the room. Beyoncé watched him with an unreadable expression. Valeria, on the other hand, gave a slight nod. Lucas took a deep breath. "This program has taught me that second chances are not asked for, they are earned. No speech can change the past, but actions can define the future." A few scattered claps were heard. Then, little by little, more people joined in. It wasn't a triumphant closing or an instant absolution, but that wasn't what he was looking for. It was a beginning. Lucas left the stage. There was still a long road ahead. Lucas woke up before dawn. For the first time in a long time, he felt he had a real purpose. His life had changed drastically in recent months, but this morning was different. It was the day he would present his book to the world. From Tyrant to Redeemed wasn't just his story. It was an open confession of his mistakes and a manual for transformation for other leaders. As he left his apartment, he took a deep breath. Today would be the first day of the rest of his life. Valeria, on the other hand, was putting the finishing touches on her speech. The conference on ethical leadership would take place in an auditorium filled with entrepreneurs, executives, and workers seeking inspiration. She had never imagined that one day she would be in that position, that her struggle would become an example. She walked onto the stage with a firm step, and when she took the microphone, the audience fell silent. "A year ago, I would never have believed I'd be standing here," she began. "I was a victim of injustice, but I decided to use my voice to ensure others wouldn't go through the same thing." The attendees' faces reflected admiration. She spoke about Innovatech, about the policy changes, and about the importance of empathy in business. Every word she spoke reaffirmed her new position. She was a leader, and her cause no longer stopped at her own story. Lucas arrived at his book launch event with a knot in his stomach. Despite his efforts, doubts remained. Would they take him seriously? Or would they see him as an opportunist trying to clean up his image? When he stepped onto the stage and looked at the audience, he recognized some skeptical faces, but also some familiar ones. Among them were Valeria and Beyoncé. He cleared his throat and began to speak. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I don't expect anyone to forget. All I hope is that my story prevents others from making the same mistakes." A silence fell over the room. Then applause. Small at first, but growing little by little until it became deafening. Lucas felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had written his story, admitted his failures, and, for the first time, had achieved something without stepping on anyone. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss more inspiring content. Share this video with friends and family who need to see stories that challenge perspectives and leave an indelible mark. Explore our channel to discover stories that inspire and transform. Until the next video. Valeria watched from her seat. She knew Lucas would never be the same man who had fired her that day at Innovatech. She knew her fight hadn't been in vain. And Beyoncé, from her seat in the front row, smiled. Her work was done, but the fight for labor justice was just beginning.